where men really talk.
Wowzer, Ballad and Cowser. What a show today.
Good Lord. I'm sure Wordsworth couldn't have put it better himself.
Well, no. I was only saying to him, I said, Will, what? Are you still wandering around, lonely as a cloud? Get a sat-nav.
He was at a one step ahead of the game. He was WW. So.
What?
William Wordsworth.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, WWW is a massive... Oh, for goodness sake, talk about a joke worth explaining,
No,
seriously.
it wasn't.
Men's at radio station on...
It was such a shit joke. I wanted you to just... I wanted to leave you hanging. I just wanted you to just drift in the wind there. I wanted the tumbleweed moment.
Before we were talking about mental health in the workplace and looking after the well-being of your colleagues. Classic example here of don't do as I do, do as I say. Anyway, you are listening to Men's Radio Station. We are bizarrely enough live. We don't quite know how we are still live. We should have been taken off by now.
Why?
I don't know.
It's a horrible thing to say.
It is a horrible thing to say, but sometimes the truth hurts. We are joined in the studio, I'm delighted to say, saving the show. Are you all right, old boy?
What was
Studio's falling apart just as we talk.
Just knock something over, don't worry about it.
I'm delighted to say that still in the studio with us is the truly inspirational Ben West, who's a mental health activist, and he has been very candidly and very openly talking about losing his brother, who was aged 15 years old when he decided to take his own life. And I'm afraid that sort of, frankly, from one tragic story to another one, because our next guest who joins us in the studio, I think can sadly relate only too well to what you've been speaking about, Ben. Amandeep Sidhu, have I pronounced your name properly?
Yep.
I hope. Joins us now. And Amandeep, perhaps you would be so kind, because I don't think we can put it in as quite as many words as you can, what your story is.
Sure, thanks. First of all, Ben, I'm very sorry for your loss. I think every death is tragic, and I'll try not to bring a too somber mood to
Don't curve anything. You need to speak how it is.
We deal with the worst that life can kind of throw up. So please do not feel that you have to put on any front with us at all. That is the whole basis of our radio programs.
Okay, thank you. So, in short, I lost my brother coming up to a year at the end of this month. So he passed away in November 2018. So he was 47 when he passed away, and he was a doctor in the NHS. He's very well established in his career. He was a consultant cardiologist. And very briefly, it was just a very tragic event in that no one realised, I guess, how he was suffering until a few weeks before he did pass away. So the story really goes as follows, is that, and a lot of what I say is with hindsight as well. So some of it's pieced with hindsight, some of it with observations at the time. And things really, I think, started to deteriorate a good few weeks, good few months before he passed away. He looked quite withdrawn as an individual.
So you say this is hindsight as opposed to you noticed this when it was happening?
A mixture of both. I'm still trying to remember at the time, because obviously things being shot, remember what I noticed at the time, what I now realise thinking back. But one thing that did stick out to me definitely at the time was he looked very, very withdrawn as an individual, and he was very, very focused on his work. So he was working very, very long hours, as a lot of doctors do, but he was really going the extra mile, because as we know, the health system is a system under strain at the moment. And simply put, there aren't enough resources, I think, for the number of patients. So, it's a very tough gig to sort of work in that environment. And things really came to a head about actually a week before he passed away. So he reached out to me, and for the first time ever, actually, as he was my older brother. So there's about a 5.5-year age gap. And he reached out to me for the first time ever, I think, that he needed my help. And he said, look, I'm pretty much done with this. I can't do this anymore, and I need to find another job. And I very clearly remember at the time he was very jittery, very shaky in his words and in his mannerism and the way he spoke. And hearing a lot of what he said about, he'd given up on his career that he worked so hard for. He felt that everything had just come to a head, and I was really quite shocked at the time, and I tried to do my best to help him through, and I gave him a bit of advice to obviously go and seek some help and immediate help with GP and occupational health, which, as I'll maybe come on to a little bit later, was probably the worst thing to do in someone in that case. And he subsequently obviously got the immediate help that he needed and was signed off sick for a month by his work, and that was on a Wednesday of a working week, and then I went to see him on the Sunday. So he lived in Kent, I live in Hertfordshire. I went to see him, and I remember that was obviously the last time that I physically saw him. But I remember he looked very, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to him, but just broken as an individual from someone who'd gone to, be the go-to person, the go-to doctor, and, the older brother, the person really well respected in society and in the public domain.
How did you recognise that he was broken? What did you see in him that didn't look right? Sorry, because there'll be people who listen to this and think, I think the same, but I'm not sure what I'm looking for.
So he just looked his eyes were very, very sullen. So it was clear that he hadn't been sleeping properly for a number of weeks. So that was really the first obvious sign. He was a little bit teary. And
I take it that was out of character.
Very out of character. That's probably the second time that I've ever seen him teary. The first time was when our dad passed away a number of years ago. But he was very... He had this look of shame on him, and
shame.
Yeah, the overwhelming thing I remember at the time, he looked ashamed that he needed help, and maybe this is something pertinent to doctors, but I know testosterone plays a very very big part in this. Is that I think it was the first time that he ever needed help, and he I think to himself probably admitted that he was in a situation where he really wasn't well. I mean, this is a guy who never took an aspirin or a paracetamol when he had a flu or something. He never had a sick day off, at school, medical school, and at work. He was the generation of doctors that did 90, 100 hours a week in the 80s and 90s. So this is a very tough, resilient guy, and I know resilience is a very fashionable word. When used appropriately, it certainly has its place. But I saw a guy that had built up a lot of resilience over the years, who was now in a situation that was just overwhelming him, and his whole body language just one of tiredness is probably an immediate word that really springs to mind. And I had a very, very long talk with him, and I said, "Look, don't worry, you'll get through this." And I explained to him that I've been through similar issues, so I could tell he was burnt out. And as we all know, the World Health Organization now defines that as a phenomenon, which is immensely helpful. So I explained to him that I'd been through a burnout phase a couple of months beforehand, and that's why I could really recognize the signs in him. And he actually got a little bit angry and said, "Well, why didn't you tell me you were ill at the time?" Because I had to take a few months off work. So typical being, like the older brother, really up until the last possible point. And then I remember just saying, "Look, everyone's here for you. I know your confidence is low, your self-esteem is gone, but this is all in your mind. I've been there. I know exactly how you're feeling." And as we all know, when someone's in that scenario, you have very much of a tunnel vision. You always see the worst possible scenario. Your engagement with reality and your perception of what is the real world is distorted. So I think there's lots of things there for people to recognise and empathise and understand with. And then the next time I heard from him, I tried to text him the next day, and he said, "Look, just leave me alone, I'm sleeping." And I thought, okay, great. For the first time ever, he's looking after himself, because he's always on the go.
Did he have a family? Yeah,
absolutely. So he had a family, I just remember on that Monday reaching out to him, and I got a text back and saying, "Look, leave me alone. I'm busy," and getting some sleep. And I thought, fantastic. And then the next time I heard from him was actually on the Tuesday, on the day after. So he sent an email at 3:10 in the afternoon, and I didn't get it on my phone until 4:00 because I was at work. And it was a very long email, and it was to me. Well, it was actually to his wife and copied me in, but it was just a very long list of instructions what to do with finances, with certain things about the house and his work, salary and pension and death in service payments and all of that. And he even, typical my brother, sort of very exact and to the point and very detailed, saying, don't forget to pick up, a prescription from the pharmacy for my daughter. And at the end, it just said, I'm at Beachy Head.
Oh, my God.
In the car. And when I looked at that, I thought, okay, what am I reading here? Because I'm looking at this email that says, make sure you get the probate done. And, so he clearly had thought through, what he wanted to write. And there wasn't any explanation about why or anything like that. It was just a very long list of instructions. And when I looked at that, and particularly the last line, as I said, it was one of shock, disbelief. And my first instinct was I had to step outside of my office. It was an open plan office. So I went to a quiet and then just looked at it again. So then my immediate response was to phone him.
Of course.
And obviously no response. Tried again. And then I just remember writing an email just in capital letters just saying, call me. And then I remember kept trying the phone, I think, several times. And then I realised, okay, I just didn't realise what was going on. So various things obviously spring to mind. And I think my first thought, honestly and truthfully, was this is probably just a cry for help or something. So I was working in West London, and I got straight back to my house in Hertfordshire and got showered up, had something to eat, and then drove straight down to Kent, where he resides. I remember getting there about 7:30, 8 o'clock, something like that, and a police car was there.
By the time you'd arrived, the police car was there.
Yes, because in between that time I phoned my sister-in-law, and she hadn't read that email, and I said, look, something's not right here. And she said, I've just got home and his car's not here and all this stuff's left behind, so what's going on? So I said, look, just phone the police. We need to work out where he is. So I got there, and the police said they filled me in on what happened thus far, and said, yeah, we found his car, but we're out looking for him. So search dogs, helicopter, the full works. And then I remember we were just sitting in silence, waiting for an update and listening to the police radio, and they were sitting in another room. And then one of the officers came in, and and the first thing he said was, "This is the part of the job I really hate." And then you get that sinking feeling. And he said, we found his body. We know it's him because we've identified him from his picture and found his car key in his pocket, which we've checked opens the car. And we're very, very sorry for your loss. And I remember just sitting around in the table as we are now in this studio, just in stunned silence, thinking, I just saw him on Sunday, and yeah, okay, he was quite down and broken, but how did we get from there to where we are now? And then I remember driving home all the way back around the lovely M25, which was empty at 9 o'clock at night, whatever it was. I told my wife, and I just went to bed. I just thought, okay, we'll go to bed. And I remember waking up at 3 a.m, just sitting bolt upright, and then I just burst out crying.
Which is really interesting. What you're saying there is because, Ben, that's sort of kind of what you were saying as well. Is just at first this instinct is to carry on regardless, and then suddenly it hits you.
It's the most oddest thing. And I just remember wailing is probably the best word. I only got a C in English at school, so I'm not very good with my vocabulary, but I just remember just wailing, and my wife had to comfort me, and I think I just managed to calm down and just get a few more hours sleep. And I've got 2 young children, so I need to think of them. But the next hardest thing I really had to do, and I would not wish this on anyone, I had to then drive to my mum's house the next morning and tell her what happened. That's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I really wouldn't wish that on anyone. And then the following weeks was just a bit of a blur, because telling people, it's the shock of it, and just people, friends, family, colleagues particularly, just completely shocked.
Did they know what to say or couldn't say anything? And frankly, what should they say? Because I think
can you say?
There's an awful lot of people. Yeah. No, but I say what should, because I know what can would imply that that's a sort of a cop out, as if there is nothing I can say. But actually, for those who are in that position, and this is actually to both of you, what is the right way to respond when you've got people around you who learn what you both have been through? and they don't know how to react. What
Yeah.
is the correct way to react, or what would you want them to do?
Firstly, I mean, what a historian, I'm so sorry for your loss. And when you were talking about that, I can see so many similarities with mine. And actually, at points, it was like you were kind of describing my story, which was a little bit weird. But I think that's why, you know, this is so important, is because they are so similar, these situations. Go back to what they should say. I think in that time, it's so important to show people that they have people to talk to. So for me, I had so many people being like, obviously, you know, I'm sorry for your loss. That's kind of just the thing to say. That's the easiest thing. That's the first thing to get out. But it's just the fact that people are approaching you and having that interaction with you is really comforting, because because I had a lot of people being like, you know, whatever you need, food, the comfort, someone to cry, just let me know. And that's really important. Just if you can sacrifice time, food, money, a bed, whatever, just try and incorporate
People
into them.
don't know, and I'm speaking from personal experience to you both, people do not realise the impact that kindness and practicality means in that situation, because you're all over the place. You can pretend you're not, but you are really all over the place, and you're in such a fog, you don't realise that you're not functioning properly. And in my own case, I would find food outside my front door.
Yeah.
This is going
it
to
was
sound like a
amazing.
ghastly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because frankly, I've never shied away from asking questions that I think people want answered. Could you tell who was genuinely sorry?
That is a one hell of a question. Yes, because, well, from my experience, you know, you had those people that would, they were ready to give you everything you needed, and were there at the doorstep with food, with flowers, with all of this stuff, just trying to make your life easy. And obviously, in that situation, you can't go and cook a meal. You can't think about that. You're not planning things like that. So to have people bring food to your doorstep and stuff like that is amazing. And I wouldn't say anyone was faking their kindness, not at all. But
No, but you can't deny
can
that a lot
tell.
of people would say as a default, I'm sorry to hear what you've been
Yeah.
through, I'm sorry for your loss. That seems like as you rightly say, something you've got to get out the way, almost.
Absolutely.
Well,
And I'm sorry, but
no,
there
I
is
think
a
I
point.
wouldn't agree with that.
No, but there's a point that to some people could
Sorry,
prove that.
Let me just come in there. So I just wanted to add to that, and I want to address your question first of all. I think, if I remember your question correctly, it was around, do you believe the empathy or emotions that people are offering in terms of kindness and sympathy?
I said very bluntly, can you tell who's genuinely sorry?
Okay. So at the time, everyone is sorry, because I can only talk from my case, and particularly I think every bereavement is tragic. When it's by suicide, it's a triple kick in the stomach. And initially, from everyone that I spoke to and talked about, absolutely, the amount of emotion and shock was overwhelming. But we made a decision as a family to be very, very clear and upfront straight away. You know, some people shy away from giving the real reason or make up excuses, but we wanted to be very, very open and honest right from the beginning. And I think by doing that, that's the way that we've seen, particularly, probably not straight away, but afterwards, people coming through and saying, oh, actually, you know, as you say, I'm just thinking about you, and just random acts of kindness. I remember that, you know, the day after just getting a food parcel dropped off at my brother's house by somebody who's a very distant relative, was actually an in-law. And it's little things like that, as you say, it absolutely hits the nail on the head and makes you realise how genuine people are. So I think it's a mixture of what people say and what people see, what people convey in their facial emotions, whether that's deliberately or not deliberately. But equally, you know, it's the actions. And I think for me, I mean, I'm sitting here almost a year on. You have to remind me when your loss was, man. But you realise very, very quickly post-funeral who your friends and family are. And even simple things, as you said before us, even just a simple hello, I'm thinking about you. I know I probably can't do anything to help. It's a very, very tough scenario you're in, but I just want you to know that I'm thinking about you. Even just a simple text on that. And I've even got messages from my friends and I can only count them on a very, very small, number of fingers on my hand. Just a simple message like that can make an absolutely huge difference. So my advice to anyone who's listening to this is, if you know someone who's going through a very tragic bereavement, particularly where there's a very, very, difficult outcome like suicide, just reaching out to those that are left behind to say, look, I'm really sorry for your loss. I can't imagine what you're going through. I may or may not have been through that myself, but I just want you to know that I'm thinking of you. I'm here for you.
See, one of the things that happens, without doubt, is if you don't do that immediately to both you guys and send a message, or it could be a text, let's be honest, it can be a text or something, and you leave it, and then the mindset comes in. People send it to me, I know. We didn't know what to do. We left it too long. We've left it too long. Now we look like idiots. Now we look rude. If I'm going to reach out to Ben's family, Sulu's family, if I'm going to reach out, they're going to really criticise me because I've left it too long. And I just want to say there never really is. There's not a statute of limitations on this if it's genuine. And I'm not trying to get on the grief wagon. Trust me, I'm really not. But I got a letter so long after the event which said, it was a misunderstanding. And I thought, screw you. And in fact, they then tried to be friends. Oddly enough, a few months ago, walked, hi, Russ, how are you? And I just told them to F off to their face and walked on. I wasn't going to have it. So, but, do reach out. Do reach out. Because people really want that help.
Yeah.
One of the things I am, Deep, that I'm struggling with, and God knows how you must have felt, is your brother, highly intelligent, highly efficient, highly educated, sends this very detailed, it's even more tragic, isn't it? This very detailed list of this is what's going to happen. So he's clearly, in one way, totally in control of his emotions, and on the other way, as out of control as you could humanly be, which could only lead to one consequence. And that disparity between having the wherewithal to write that list, and even down to don't forget to pick up the prescription, is extraordinary. And then, ending his very fulfilled life in such a dramatic way. Yeah. It's hard to square that circle, isn't it?
That's a good point. And I'm part. Since my brother passed away, I've tried to research and understand this space. I guess to really understand the circumstances of how he passed away, but really with the intention of making sure that others don't succumb to the same fate. I think the human mind is a very complex organ. I'm not a doctor. I'm actually a pharmacist by training, but not a very good one. So I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for a number of years.
Tell us where you are, because we don't want to go to that particular chemist. We really don't.
No. Well,
not being personal in a moment of tragedy, but
No, fair enough.
Don't actually answer that, because we don't want you to lose business. But yeah.
No.
Why do you say? I'm so sorry, because I actually go to a pharmacy more than I speak to the pharmacist way more than I speak to a doctor.
Good.
They got more time. They know what the hell they're doing. They're not pressured, and I don't have to go through a bloody receptionist. I can have a proper chat, and they're not under such constraints, and they're brilliant. I've always found pharmacists to be brilliant. Why do you say with such self-depreciation? In such a self-deprecating manner, well, I'm not a very good pharmacist. Why?
Well, I left community pharmacy 15 years ago because at the time I just grew quite disaffected with it. And looking back, actually, I was starting to get a little bit overwhelmed and, I guess, burnt out to a little degree. And, but by me saying, and hopefully the regulator's not listening. If they are, please phone me. They've got my details.
Terry, if you're listening, I don't know what his name is. I just made that up. Go on.
It's actually Duncan, but he's the chief exec. But I couldn't.
Just Terry's my default name for everything.
Enough. But I couldn't really sort of go back into that. Where I was 15 years ago, because I've been out of it. I haven't. My skill sets are different. I've worked in the same industry, but more out of the industrial scale. So, So I guess what I'm saying is that, I couldn't go back to being patient-facing without a lot of effort, a lot of retraining, because my skill sets have developed over the past few years into something that's more different and helping patients other way. But I want to go back to your original point about, I guess, the dichotomy that my brother was in. And
don't worry about James. We don't.
The mind is it's a very, very complex organ. I've talked to psychiatrists, I've talked to psychologists and psychotherapists, etc. And I genuinely think that my brother, I don't think he actually wanted to die. I think he just wanted to end his suffering. And that's something that I've learned from a lot of people that I've talked through that have been affected by suicide.
That is a very deep and very complicated sentence.
And one actually that probably got the most vigorous nod from Ben as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, my exposure to suicide is only, from a research point of view, just really doctors. But a lot of similar cases I've heard about, the scenarios is the same, and they just really want to end their suffering. And I can only imagine, I think when my brother stood on the edge of the Beachy Head Cliffs, he looked out to the open sea and just saw serenity and just saw calmness, and an escape from, I guess, the pain and suffering that he was in, which must have been immensely traumatic and immeasurable. But I can only imagine that he decided to do what he did, because he wanted to immerse himself in that environment. And when I read about other cases, there was a GP that jumped off London Bridge, I think, a few months ago. There's real parallels and resonance, I guess, with that and my brother's case, and from what I've read and understood from similar cases.
We're going to discuss the whole area of Doctors in Distress, which you founded. But to both of you, the fact that you have taken tragedy and then tried to put good back into society, a word I loathe, as you know, is immeasurably wonderful. Really is. It's the most extraordinary show today. It really is. It's affecting me quite deeply.
I was going to say, I don't think I've ever been so quiet.
No,
anyway.
no, well, there's always a plus side. This is Men's Radio Station with the wonderful Phil Dave. Yes, he's all right. James Blake, new T-shirt. I'm Russ Kane, back in a mo.
You're listening to Men's Radio Station, where men really talk.
Do you want to hang out and really know that you've been listened to? Do you want to debrief and have a laugh and not have to fall down the same hole as every other man in front of you? Then why not go to mensgroups.co.uk, download the Men's Groups ground rules, download the Men's Groups check-in round. There are loads of videos and you can just hit the ground running, growing with other men.
Your call is important to us. You are now number 15 in a queue.
At Profile Insurance Services, we treat people as individuals. You'll speak to a real person, not a call centre. We're fast, small, independent, and have a superb team of insurance specialists. And they're really nice too. Advice is totally free and we cover everything. Call 0208 931 3306. Listeners to Men's Radio Station won't pay a penny for admin fees. That's 0208 931 3306. With Profile Insurance Services, you're covered.
You're listening to Men's Radio Station, the only radio station that's 100% dedicated to mental health and well-being. We're on air and broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In fact, we never sleep. If you want to listen on the move, please download our app. It's easy to do. www.mensradiostation.com is the website, or follow us on social media. Men's Radio Station, where men really talk.
Hi, I'm Noel McDermott, licensed psychotherapist and host of Wellbeing Wednesdays. During Wellbeing Wednesdays, I talk about all things psychotherapy and mental well-being, offering practical help and advice on issues around relationships, anxiety, depression, drugs and alcohol, whilst trying to improve your mental health and giving you an interesting stories from our guests. Join the conversation, have your voice heard, or ask for advice from one of my many specialist guests. We can try and advise you on your problems. Be part of the conversation. Come and join us every Wednesday from 9 to 10:30 p.m. on Men's Radio Station, where men really talk.
Talking Therapy Sessions, a new radio show coming soon.
Hear pre-recorded professional counsellors talking live to their clients.
Hear real-life issues being discussed.
Listen to how trained practitioners deal with these issues.
Never had a therapy session before?
Not sure what counselling entails?
Tune in and hear firsthand what a therapy session is really like.
Brought to you by the Men's Radio Station in partnership with the One Stop Psychotherapy Shop and supported by over 200 trained counsellors across the UK.
You're listening to Men's Radio Station, where men really talk.
Thank you for staying with us. This is coming at you live from the centre of London, right here in Covent Garden, the studios of Men's Radio Station. I'm Russ Kane with Phil Dave, and rocking the deck as ever. Our new deck is James Blake doing
Is it still new? It's a bit old now.
Shut up.
It's time for an upgrade.
It's like 2 weeks old.
Hey,
Shut
look,
up.
it's technology. That's old in technology terms.
I really like the new desk. Just want to say.
Thank you very much,
colourful.
James. We are joined by
colourful.
two extra. Can we just, boys, please, please. We are joined by two extraordinary guests. It's been an extraordinary show, to be honest. Ben West, mental health activist, who lost his brother when his brother was just 15 years old. That was just a year and a half ago. And a year ago, Amandeep Sidhu lost his elder brother, both to suicide. And both the guys are here talking about their experiences, talking about how it impacted, talking about the build-up and not seeing the signs. Now, Amandeep, you saw... Was this all through, with your brother, was this through the sheer pressure of his job, the unrelenting pressure?
In short, yes. So I'll never know for sure exactly what happened, but the most likely explanation is as follows. I think he was burnt out for a number of months, if probably not years, but hid it very, very well. And then as a result of that, he probably developed a depression or a low mood state that reached a crisis point that really tipped him over the edge. As part of his passing, his work commissioned an independent report into the circumstances around his death. And he was working a large number of hours. He was doing the work of two consultant doctors.
And remind everybody what he was doing, because I've got it in my notes. But
Sorry, yeah. So he was a consultant cardiologist. So he was doing angioplasties and other interventional things like that. And one particularly acute to his scenario was that one of his fellow team members was off sick long term himself. With a physical issue. So my brother had to pick up all of his work, and there wasn't really much support or resource from the environment that he was in. So he was really working two people's jobs, and as we know, doctors are under a lot of pressure in a very constrained
Can I ask a really
system.
stupid question at this point? You knew he's working two people's jobs effectively,
Yeah.
and whoever looked after him, or whoever he reported to, or his colleagues, there seems to be a real disconnect here. Or am I being very naive?
No, you're being absolutely spot on. So something that I've discovered that's quite sort of, I guess, endemic or not consistent in the NHS particularly, is what I would call a compassionate work culture. So my brother obviously had people that he reported into and did various bits of bobs, but one of the standout features in his report, and I quote near verbatim, was that the management oversight of his workload and what he was doing was haphazard at best, but more likely entirely lacking. And this is something that I discovered quite quickly in the NHS particularly, is that the doctors are very much left to just get on with it. And I've written in several blogs, nearer the time and since then, that the work environment that he was in was probably as follows. So irrespective of whether there's enough resources or the right support or teamwork, the expectation and culture is just get on with it. And I can understand that to a point in the business of saving people's lives, because you have to save people's lives. There are people dying in front of you, and you do have to just get on with it. But I would ask the question, at what cost?
But that get on with it attitude that you speak of, is that why you mentioned right towards the start of this interview that you said one of the worst things that you could have done or he could have done was go to occupational health. Is that the reason why?
So no, thanks for reminding me on that. So what I've again discovered with doctors and other professions that really have perfectionism traits, really high achievers, bankers and lawyers, etc. My brother saw the point that he was signed off sick or told that he cannot work, and pardon the pun, as the final nail in his coffin. I think he saw that as the sign to say, you cannot do your job, you're not capable of being the doctor that you can, and you can't help patients anymore. And a lot of doctors, and 99% of the ones that I've met, really give over their lives to work in this vocation because they want to save people's lives. They want to make a difference. And my brother was probably made to feel that he was no longer able to do that. And
now, was he... You see, that's a moot point, isn't it? And it's a very subtle point. Was that because of his low mood state, or let's call it depression, whichever term you know, and obviously I didn't know your brother, was that his interpretation of that, or was that the inference, let's call them management, I don't know what else to say, was that the inference from management, you can't do your job? You see there's a difference.
Yeah, it was his perception, but I would say that perception exists throughout the whole of the profession and the health system. And one thing I remember when he was actually signed off sick, he told me very, very quickly, he said, right, I've signed off sick for a month. The first thing he said was, who the hell's now going to look after all these patients? Because now I'm now not here. The second thing he said was, I can't really go back to that same environment, because he thought completely incorrectly that he would be thought of negatively.
Stigmatized,
yes. Seen as being not able to cope. And this is something that a lot of people in very, very stressful and high-achieving jobs are made to feel like. I've been there as well, from a personal perspective. So I can completely understand that. But the one of the issues and beefs that I have, which is the reason why I created my charity, was I wanted to raise awareness of issues like this, particularly within the profession, is that's a concept and an ingraining of people in that profession that happens at medical school.
Well, by a curious coincidence, now that you mentioned your charity, please do tell us about Doctors in Distress, because obviously that is the name of the charity that is hopefully does do what it says on the tin. It helps rather than causes. What occurs? What is the charity?
Yeah, so as people can probably infer, I was really motivated to set something up to partly to honour my brother and to sort of keep that.
And may I just say another parallel between our two guests here?
Yeah, and but more importantly, I want as many people, or I want as many people as possible to learn from that story, because an event I'm speaking at the end of this month, and I know we have close affiliations with the station with, is This Can Happen. And I think one of the punchlines that I would give for this interview is, this can happen to absolutely anybody. And if it happened to my brother, it can happen to any member of the public.
Did you ever think it would happen to you?
No. Absolutely not. No.
But Ben, you see, I'm hesitating for asking this because it's not a great question, but I'm going to go there.
Go for it.
You've got Amandeep's brother, who is in his 40s, in the middle of his career, and your brother, who's just a kid at 15. Was there any was there a reason? Was it a school thing? Was he being bullied? Well, I don't know. I'm clutching at straws.
No, it's an interesting question. It is an interesting question, because that's what you're immediately faced with. Is why that's the obvious. That's what separates suicide from a lot of other grief. Is there's this massive mystery as to why it's happened. It's difficult because you're desperate to find something. So you do, in the first stage of grief, pretend like it was... I mean, he was just about to sit his GCSEs, so, it was GCSEs and the pressure of that. But then, no, it probably wasn't just that alone. And I think what you can return it to is the fact that mental health and mental health problems never come from one place, or very, very rarely come from one place. Maybe they stem from one particular place, but you don't become suicidal through one cause. Usually you have a bunch of different things, and it's that final straw.
Sorry, can I just add to that as well? one of the things that I've learned about suicide is, and I'm sure it's known around this table and through the airwaves, you don't have to be mentally ill to die by suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really big misconception and a myth.
Expand on that?
Well, again, I've spoken to a lot of psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. To reach an acute phase of anxiety or these aren't the right medical terms, but mental crisis, you don't have to be chronically mentally ill. It's not a prerequisite. I'll be honest, I felt suicidal at times in my life, and I'm sure everyone else has, despite whether they care to admit it or not. The point I'm trying to make to what you're saying then is to take the step from having suicidal thoughts.
I was just going to say, there's a massive difference, though, isn't there, from feeling suicidal to actually carrying out the deed?
If you're in a distressed enough state, no. It's, I think, and I'm not a suicide expert. I can only refer to the cases and experiences that I've gone through.
But arguably that qualifies you in other ways, so please don't put it down.
Okay, so I guess the point I'm trying to make is from the feeling of having suicidal thoughts to seriously thinking and planning it, and then thinking, actually, something, if your brain suddenly tweaks, well, actually, that actually sounds quite reasonable and quite good. I don't think that's a very, very big leap. And my original point still stands, is you don't have to be medically diagnosed with a mental illness in order to be at risk of suicide. And I think that's very well known.
I think a lot of one of the reasons I think people actually do commit suicide and they actually go through the act is it's seen as a way of getting back control of their life. I know we've had a few guests come through here that have said, as I was getting closer and closer to doing it, the more I was thinking about taking my own life, the more I felt like I was taking control back. So it's like you said, if you're experienced burnt out, or if you're working ridiculous hours all the time, you could feel a little bit out of control and all over the place. And I think that's maybe the difference between just having the thought and actually doing it. You could have the thought because something happens.
Yeah.
But the whole mentality of going through with the act is like, I'm going to take back control.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. But I think the fundamental point to maybe take away from this little sort of side conversation is do something about it before you even get to that point.
I agree.
But if you don't,
how do you know you're at that point?
How do you know you're at that point then?
Right, okay. So everyone has mental health, as we all know. And I'm going to refer to a tweet that someone put on my website. And I just want to quote that verbatim because I think it's absolutely brilliant. So someone wrote, "We need to stop telling people it's their responsibility to ask for help. We, as their colleagues or friends, need to step up and step in when we think a colleague is in trouble. Putting all the responsibility on the person in distress is a recipe for failure. Time for some radical kindness." Does that answer your question?
Well, look, it certainly... I think what it does do is it throws up a very interesting thought, because a lot of people wouldn't think like that, would they? And I actually believe that people would be forgiven for not thinking like that as well.
And that's why my charity exists.
That's not necessarily the reason that, I'm sorry, there's the S word again, society has necessarily been brought up to think. Because
then it needs to change.
It's everyone. It's how many times we hear "every man for himself." For goodness' sake, that is sort of inherent in so many of us. It's a case of think for yourself, stand on your own 2 feet. All of these little phrases can actually have a massive effect on us without us actually realising.
I agree, but I think phrases that we need to maybe ask ourselves of as being members of a society is, are those phrases right for us? Do we now need to rethink them? Maybe have something like, "We're all in this together. We need to look out for one another." I would suggest as a starter for 10, those are probably better phrases or programming that we need as individuals. And that's one of the reasons why I created my charity, to make sure that people in that state
How do people
do that?
find your charity? Well, to give us all the details.
Okay.
Then Ben, I'm coming to you so everybody can get all the knock.
Can I just say before you give the details, because on that point, speaking of phrases that people need to rethink, it's interesting the number of people who still say, as if it is a criminal act, commit suicide. The number of people who say that is extraordinary. That is actually wholly inaccurate, because now suicide is not a criminal act. So you don't commit suicide.
It was criminal decades ago, and I think a more sympathetic phrase, particularly ones that are left behind, is "died by suicide." Mm-hmm. And I certainly, for one, in the engagements that I have with other bodies and third parties, I start to hear that phrase a lot more. So that's reassuring.
It's very, you see, it goes back, guys, to what we were saying a little bit earlier, it's so easy to sit here. I know other radio stations would do it, and they'd pontificate, and so there's some easy way, and this is the view. And I'm like everybody else, like Phil and James here, we struggle with a lot of this. We struggle with it, which is why we're passionate about it, but we don't have all the answers, neither do we say. So when Phil was being a little bit, disparatory about, I'm so sorry for your loss, you've got to start literally the sentence with something that isn't crass. You're feeling covered in embarrassment. You're really awkward. You don't know how.
And that's the point I'm trying to make.
But even these guys, put them back a year ago, you wouldn't know you think, I don't want to make an idiot of myself. I don't want to upset them any further. How the hell do I get through this absolute emotional minefield? So
exactly.
I don't have a problem. And I know you weren't being rude, Paul, because you haven't got a rude bone in your body, but it was like, and don't make a silly remark, it was like, I'm so sorry for your loss. Then you got to start the conversation, and then you can get into other things. You see what I'm saying? But you have to have an open.
But it is such a British way, I think, in any way, actually. It doesn't even have to be British. A British way of breaking the ice, the proverbial ice, because I'm not convinced that actually helps. Because if you don't believe that the person saying it is saying it for any other reason than they are duty bound, is that the best start to an already horrific situation?
It's a start.
I think it's perfectly fine. If you don't know what to say, just say, I'm sorry, I just don't know what to say.
And I'd have more respect for that.
And
there's my point. That's exactly my point. If someone was to say, I genuinely have no idea what to say.
Ben doesn't look so convinced by that.
I think people overthink this situation so much.
Yeah.
And really, I remember back then, I really didn't mind what people were saying. I just had the comfort from people actually saying something that was vaguely positive and supportive. And going back to the commit suicide thing, people were saying that left, right, and centre when this has happened. Obviously, because they were young, they were impressionable. That's the word they've used, and a lot of people were saying that to me. And I think you've just got to, I don't know how to phrase this in a better way, but take it with a pinch of salt and not look too far into it. And I know one girl messaged me a few months after it happened, and she said, "Look, I didn't say anything to you when this was all going on because I thought the best thing that I could do was give you space. I thought that was the kindest thing to do."
That's beautiful.
And you know what?
That is beautiful.
If that's what she thought was kind, then that's fine. That's fine by me. And if I'm sorry for your loss is what they think is the kind thing to do, then that's fine.
You see, it's such a... It doesn't get any more emotional than that. And today's been a very emotional show, but it doesn't get the situations that both of you have so sadly encountered, right? Through no fault of your own, let's be clear. It's as extreme as you get. It is that extreme. And so it's a bit like, it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. You're going into uncharted territory. You're on a spaceship and you've never been there before, and hopefully you never have to again. And so it's not always a question of right and wrong. And what your friend did, at least they came back and they said, at least I wanted to give you that space. I can go there. I often say, look, I'm there. It's not empty words, I'm there. If you need me, you phone me, all right? I'm not always going to be because I'm running around like an idiot, all right? I'm not going to keep popping up at your doorstep, but I'm there, you phone me. And I often, coming over, I made 3 phone calls, all of whom I knew people had nowhere near like where you guys are. But I deliberately made 3 phone calls, reaching out to just let them know, hey, I'm here, thinking about you, and then had a little chat, and that was it.
But the point is that I'm making in all of this, and any comments that I make should never be taken out of context, because genuinely, I am clearly in a position, and I class myself even more lucky than when I walk through the door, that I am not in the position that the 3 of you individually have been in and are in terms of grief-stricken in certain ways, and really hideous ways at that. The point is that because we don't do anything as, all right, forget the term society, as a race, as a people, we don't do anything to help others know how to help those who go through this. That's why we sort of hit stumbling blocks. And the best way to know how to deal with it is by speaking to those who have gone through it and hear what they want to hear, or actually understand what they want to hear from those who are on the outside looking in. That's my point I'm getting at. I'm not saying it because I'm denigrating people's reactions or doubting their intentions. It's actually highlighting the fact that we are bog useless at dealing with grief, both those who go through it and those who are trying to help others
but
go through it.
We're a lot better than we were. We're a lot better. We can use language. We have the terminology. We have the words, and we're not so scared that these words are just going to smash us in the face. You know, we're not there. But then you've got the other side of, I don't want to cause offence. This particular British thing, you know, I don't want to cause offence because, oh my God, I've already gone through enough, these poor bastards, and now look, now I've walked in with my size 28 feet and I've made it even worse. Oh, I mean, it's horrible. The difference is, by the way, Phil, I just want to say, I want to clarify one thing with you and with the listeners, is I had time to prepare. I had time to prepare. Mind you, it doesn't make any difference, but I had time, right? I had plenty of time. These guys...
But that's what I said, in your own individual way.
These guys had no time to prepare at all. And, you know, I think that's a very, very different and much harsher situation. No, I don't. You're
but you
looking at me.
can't tell me that time would have made it any easier, and I don't believe time made it any easier for you.
No, it doesn't make it easier. No, but I can kind of rationalise it. These guys are like leading their own lives, and then boom, everything completely turns 180. That's a totally. I'm not talking like you're not in the room, boys. You know what I'm saying? It's sudden. And
chip in. This is not an argument between Ross and I.
No, I'm just saying. I think their situation was far. It's like seventh ring of hell. What's even worse? I think it was worse. I think it was worse, and especially these are young guys. 47's nothing. 15. Don't even get me started. I like welling up. So. I think it's a worse situation, if you can be even worse. And I think the both of you have dealt with it such amazing bravery. I really, really do. The charity, what's its main aim?
So I set up the charity Doctors in Distress, and it's on the search engines. Just Google, Doctors in Distress. I can give out the web address, but it's all.
Please do.
Well, it's www.doctors-in-distress.org.uk, or just Google Doctors in Distress. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and LinkedIn, and all of that. But I wanted three basic main aims. So number one was to eradicate stigma around specifically doctors' mental health, but anyone's mental health. Number two, to change cultures and behaviours to encourage a better working environment for doctors specifically, but again, this can apply to anyone. And number three, particularly in the work environment, to promote the value of good, positive, strong and appropriate leadership. Those are my three main aims.
What's a sign of strong leadership? What needs to change? What do we need to recognise is not strong leadership?
Okay, so the leadership that my brother lacked was, number one, I only just discovered this, but all doctors have what's called a job plan. That basically lists what they're supposed to be doing on a week-by-week basis and how long it's supposed to take them. The NHS does not have a process to measure how much people are working. What is a doctor's workload? That's one example. I think in all the years that my brother worked, I don't think anyone actually asked him from a human point of view, how are you? How are you doing? Is everything okay? I don't think anyone even asked him that question. Number three, and I think we touched on this earlier, it's that just get on with it attitude. Sometimes, and in a lot of situations, I don't think that's just good enough. You cannot just get on with it because, as we've seen, it can drive people to despair. So, hopefully that explains, I guess, some elements or examples of good leadership that I would like to see.
And I would like to say on this point, and make very, very clear, this is not about knocking or denigrating the great work the NHS do. This is not about treatment of staff. You obviously haven't identified any particular trust, but what I would say is that if anyone from the NHS is listening to this and thinks, well, that's not how I experience it, please feel free, because we'd love to hear from you.
And I want to be really, really clear. I love the NHS. I think it's an absolutely fantastic institution. It's something we should cherish. The reason I'm doing what I'm doing is to help protect the people that work in it, so we can continue to have a good NHS, because I want to be looked after when I'm 70, 80, 90, and I want to make sure the NHS is in the best place possible. But in order to do that, we have to look after the people that are working under inhumane workloads and working in very, very distressed environments. And again,
and may we say unintentionally?
Unintentionally, but my hope is that the level of leadership and resources is more consistent across the NHS going forward. There are pockets of some absolutely brilliant practice that I've seen. I've talked to some great chief execs, some great medical directors, etc. They're doing great things, but it's all compartmentalised. And I appreciate the NHS is a huge animal, but my hope is by raising awareness of these, that it's raising the bar consistently across that institution.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. But of course, we go from theory to reality. And I agree with everything you've said. There is nothing there that I have no contention with any of it. The problem is the workload is impossible. A huge population, putting the NHS, which was already squeaking 10, 15 years ago, in an impossible vice now. And that is why I'm sure your brother, no one said, how are you? Because they just got to keep, it's like this huge factory churning out widgets, and the widgets are you and me, the patients, and it can never stop.
Yeah, and he had his one of the other things that he told me before he passed away, he had his own theory on this. And he actually put it very, very simply, and I'm not an expert on the NHS by any means, but this really made a lot of sense. The way he put it was as follows. He said, in the past 20, 30 years, the population of this country's increased. It has also grown older. Yeah. It is therefore more chronically ill. It needs more looking after. But comparatively, the system has not scaled up to deal with that increase in workload. And he said that's the fundamental reason why the health systems, all of those policies, procedures, etc., are in the state that they're in now, because it hasn't scaled up to meet with demand.
And worse than that, because years ago as a corporate writer, I had to do a whole thing about ageing population. I'm going back 25, 30 years probably. And back then, they knew perfectly well there wasn't enough money to pay for the pensions properly, and they knew they were facing, I'm going back at least 30 years when I was doing the research and the writing for I forgot what organisation it was, and it was statistical. They knew then. And it was coming down the road, and there was nothing they could do about it.
I totally and utterly don't want to steer the ship away in a completely different direction, especially with such a short amount of time left to go. But there's one question that I very much realised, Ben, that we didn't ask you, that I very much hope you don't mind answering. And again, as ever, feel free to tell us to back off. But Amandeep has very clearly said a couple of times that his brother was speaking and almost did reach out. Was there ever a point where your brother spoke out and wasn't taken seriously, or did it come out of nowhere?
No, he spoke out, and he was getting treatment. He was actively getting treatment at a priory. So he had a team that were working with him, and he was classed as low risk, and he was actually improving in all of the records they had.
Was this? I'm really sorry. Was this depression?
For depression,
right,
yeah.
okay.
So he's being treated for depression.
Don't worry.
Just ignore me. Ignore James.
Yeah, so he's been treated for depression, and for all records show that he was improving. So he was speaking about it, and actually, not many people know this, but he was campaigning himself.
Oh, God.
For mental health awareness.
Oh, God.
So he realised that he was uncomfortable talking to people about it because he thought he was going to be judged. So he secretly went around the school and put posters up about mental health and what you can do to talk to people. And I knew about that. I saw the things, and they were great. And I think.
But you didn't know it was from him?
They were all over school. I had no idea they were him.
And you didn't? Wow.
Yeah. Until my mum told me that he'd done them. And one of them, which really sticks in my mind, was it said, it was like, what is depression? It says depression is feeling lonely but wanting to be alone. And I just thought, whoa, that's what I took away, because he made that was exactly what he was feeling. But he was trying to do these things to reach out, and he was very much trying to reach out. But I think at that age, your brain's rewiring during puberty. It just takes that one.
Do you know, there's
a
comment on Facebook which I think sums up today's show brilliantly. Pete very clearly says, "Good on you all."
Oh,
thank you,
Pete.
Well, absolutely. We endorse what Peter said. Our special guest extraordinary, extraordinary morning. It's left me emotionally drained. How the hell you two guys cope? I don't know. Amandeep Sidhu, CEO and founder of Doctors in Distress, Ben West, extraordinary for any age, 19, it's jaw-dropping. Mental health activist. Thank you so much to Zoe Sinclair, founder of Employees Matter and founder of TCH Events, and Luciano Lorio with his extraordinary book about his dad who had 5 trials. If you ever wonder why we created Men's Radio Station, I hope today is just a shining example of the work and the huge amount of work that lies ahead for all of us. My thanks to Phil Dave, as always. Thank you, James Blake, for
doing your stuff
and a new T-shirt. I'm Russ Kane. This is Men's Radio Station. Till we meet again, stay safe.